symptoms for cannabis dependence. Tolerance was the first one. How do you know when you develop marijuana tolerance? You smoke more than you used to or more often, right? But it's hard to measure. Right? So I think marijuana tolerance exists. We have THC tolerance in the lab. Right? But why is tolerance a symptom of dependence? Well, with alcohol, the more tolerant you become, the more physical harm you're doing. If I have to drink a fifth every night to get drunk, right, which I've worked with guys that way, my liver's really taking a fucking beating. If you're tolerant to cannabis, what is the negative consequence? Right? You have a bigger belly and a thinner wallet. So the tragedy of cannabis tolerance is something I just want to assess. Now, the other symptom, you might remember this from the little green book, time loss. Time spent obtaining, using, or recovering from the drug. And the problem is it's yes to all, right? It's just one question. Have you lost time obtaining, using, or recovering the drug? Right. Tell me about the cannabis hangover. Dude, I smoked so much pot last night I just can hardly fucking function. You ever hear that? Right. There isn't. Right? Not that people haven't tried. Right? Now using, okay, if you're high all the time and like you forgot that it was April 21st, like that day disappeared on you, okay, totally. Right? But obtaining, okay, oh dude, I couldn't find any pot, and then I drove down over here, and then, oh shit, I went over on Pico, and I went to Vermont, and I couldn't find pot. Right? That's what they're, right? This time spent obtaining the drug, I think, is a product of prohibition, not a product of dependence. Okay? In Amsterdam, you think people are like, oh yeah, I spent hours and hours trying to find some pot. Right? In West Hollywood, oh dude, I had to walk 4 blocks before I could find a pot place. Okay? I had to pass 2 Starbucks. So just want to keep that in mind. And then more often or in greater amounts. This is a genuine symptom of dependence, right? I meant to have 2 togs and I smoked the whole gram. Okay, genuine. I swore I'd only get high on Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays. I swore, but I snuck in a couple of Thursdays and 2 Wednesdays. And a Monday. Right. That's a sign of dependence. I will totally buy it. But again, what is the big dreaded negative consequence? Twinkie overdose? Right. I didn't get as much done as I wanted. I only watched half a sitcom and then I fell asleep. Again, let's keep this in mind. Okay. The other thing I want to emphasize is folks who smoke pot and drink alcohol, I think, often misattribute some of their alcohol symptoms to cannabis. Right? So my student, Sarah Smuckwell, as she calls herself now, because she married a guy named Barnwell, and her last name was Smucker, so now they're the Smuckwells. But she didn't like Smucker because, of course, you can't say it without thinking of what?
Jelly.
Jelly, right? She lives in, actually, she's in Washington State now. I wonder if she can, anyway, crazy. But what she was saying is, look, here are the folks who, on this dashed line, drink more than average. And then this solid line, these are the folks who drink less than average. What is the correlation between how much pot they smoke and how many dependence symptoms they have? Well, curiously, the folks who don't drink much, no matter how much pot they smoke, they pretty much have between 0 and 1 dependence symptom. drink a lot, the more pot they smoke, the more dependent symptoms they have. Makes you wonder. Okay. Now we know alcohol and cannabis do interact. Alcohol slows THC metabolism, so maybe that's the mechanism. Or maybe these guys are attributing some of their dependent symptoms from alcohol to cannabis. And I want to keep that in mind when we're interpreting this dependency. Lung function. This literature has been confusing in part because there really isn't a very big effect here. So COPD, what's that? We talked about when we did cigarettes. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Right? How much gunk is clogging up your lungs? How much air can you blow out? And how fast can you blow it out? Those are how we measure it. 2 to 3 joints per day, Tashkin's data from UCLA, for 15 years, the folks who smoke pot and only pot, he's not seeing any increase in COPD compared to the folks who don't smoke pot at all. Okay? However, Bloom, 1 joint per day, he did show impairment. How do we account for this? All right. Well, Tashkin's at UCLA, Bloom's in Arizona. The air was still clean in Arizona when this was happening. In LA, it was not. I think, in part, the control group in LA is sucking smog all day long. So it looks like these guys have no more COPD than the controls, but it's because the controls are actually getting worse. How about just respiratory illness? How about going to the doctor for coughing and wheezing and tightness in the chest? All right, symptoms of bronchitis, basically. This also got a huge amount of press. Poland looked at basically everybody who's in Kaiser, which is this giant HMO in California. Folks who smoke pot every single day versus folks who never smoke pot. Across a 6-year period, those who never smoked pot, 1/3 of them, 33%, had been to the doctor for bronchitis. For those who smoke every day, 36%. Ooh. A giant, statistically significant finding. Why? Because there were 4 million fucking people at Kaiser, right? There's a giant sample here. What do we see, even in Tashkin's data, daily users do have more bronchitis symptoms. They cough more. They report coughing up more phlegm. Right? And tobacco invariably makes it worse. The combination of tobacco and pot always makes these symptoms worse. Okay. What about lung cancer? The Institute of Medicine says there's no conclusive evidence that marijuana causes cancer. Right? Particularly lung cancer. Okay, how come? It looks like THC is actually protective against tumor formation, and nicotine actually encourages tumor formation, although it doesn't allow it to cause it by itself. Smoking tobacco, not just the Institute of Medicine, but actually your mom said smoking tobacco causes lung cancer. We do have compelling data on that. Okay. What we did see, it's from Tashkin's lab, but he let his grad student Roth be the first author. Biopsies taken from lung tissue cannabis users had cellular changes like tumors. Right? You start to see the ciliated cells lose that cilia and start looking more like skin. That's often the first step towards tumor formation in lung cancer. Right? But Bob Malley points out that, in fact, because of THC, we slough those cells off of your lungs. Your lungs will actually cough that shit out and form a new one. In the presence of nicotine, that process doesn't happen. And the tumor formation is much more likely in the presence of nicotine, even though the smokes are almost identical, except for THC versus nicotine. So what kind of harm reduction can we recommend? First and foremost,
All right, I realize right before finals there's no time to tell people to quit smoking, but quit smoking. Cigarettes are really bad for you. Cigarettes are the #1 generator of statistics in health science. What happens with lung function? Well, who gets more TARs deposited in their lungs? All right, we talked about this when we're talking about stronger pot. Matthias was really James Zachney's lab. He had the two kinds of pot that were available from Knight at the time, a 4% THC and the 2% THC. If somebody sold you this on the street, you'd punch them in the face. Right? But this was the strongest that they had. Right? And he found if you're smoking 4% THC pot, what do? You take smaller hits, you don't hold them in as long, and you get less tar deposited on the lungs than the 2% THC. In fact, all this alarmist crap about stronger pot being a horrible thing may be wrong, because you actually end up smoking less. From a pulmonary harm reduction perspective, stronger pot is better. So definitely don't smoke cigarettes. Don't hold hits. Okay. Zachney's lab, they had people come in, placebo and not. You're going to take a hit and blow it right out, or you take the hit and you hold it 10 seconds. Now I realize 10 seconds is nothing to some of you lung busters. Okay. All you're doing is giving yourself a crazy head rush from holding your breath and thinking it's from the pot, and then giving the smoke a chance to deposit tar in your lungs. And nobody ever fucking believes me. My very first High Times column was about this, and I got 9,000 angry hate mails. Like, no way, dude, because I know, because blah, blah, blah. You know how I know? Because guess who got high in the placebo group? The folks who held it for 10 seconds. Right? So if you really want that experience, hold your breath for as long as you can, but blow the smoke out first. Blow the smoke out, then hold your breath. You will get just as high as if you do that. All right? Vaporize, I can't say this enough. Okay, I have 2 papers on this. I'm reviewing one right now. The vaporizer is your friend. What does the vaporizer do? Heats cannabis high enough so it doesn't light on fire, but the cannabinoids come out in this fine mist. Okay? My data show 1 month on the vaporizer, folks who reported respiratory symptoms from cannabis a month later had improved. And that blowing into the machine, the absolute volume of their lungs improved in just a month of vaporizer use. Now these were some heavy users and obviously some folks who had respiratory symptoms, but I'm really a fan of this. Okay. Use quality cannabis. Listen up, because I'm only going to say this 5,000 times. Life's too short to smoke bad pot. Finally, consider oral ingestion.